Picture this. You're in a conversation in English. You're using the right grammar, the right words, but something feels off. The other person is smiling, but the energy of the conversation just kind of dies down. Maybe they make a polite excuse, but they walk away. And you're left wondering, what just happened? What did I do wrong? If you're a global professional using English today, you are likely speaking in an environment that is not your home culture. And sometimes you might think you're making a mistake with your English when it's actually something related to culture. But nobody hands you an invisible manual of the rules of these kinds of environments. Corporate environments where culture is different, or a country, like a new community where you're living. These invisible rules can kind of feel like social landmines, waiting to sabotage your fluency and your ability to use the language well. They can feel like traps that make you feel like an outsider when your English is actually pretty good. Well, today we're exposing them. We're pulling back the curtain on social code that native speakers know and use without second thought, and the ones that we typically never teach each other when we are learning each other's languages. This video will be part 1 in a series of 3 on culture and speaking English as a global professional. By the end of the video, I hope that you have what you need to connect with people better in English across cultures. Click the link in the description of this video and get a free copy of my book, Big World Legends, Your Practical Guide to Clear and Confident Professional English. It's 45 pages of tons of tips, videos, all kinds of trainings and good stuff that I've written just for global professionals who want to speak English confidently. Use the code LEGENDS and get 100% off, and get my mailing list with tons of other tips and things. I don't spam, none of that. First, let's start with a helpful perspective on how to think about culture. Edward T. Hall, a famous anthropologist, had this theory of culture that it's like an iceberg. The tip of the iceberg at the top, which is the visible part, is the part of culture that is called surface culture. Surface culture includes things like architecture, food, clothing, folk art. The key thing to know about surface culture is that it's the most noticeable part to outsiders. The bottom of the iceberg that's under the water and therefore invisible or very difficult to see, this is the largest part of culture. And this is the part of culture that includes things like reward and privilege, proxemics, concepts of time, grooming and presence. When you move to a new country, maybe get a new job, these are the things that are actually the most difficult to change. Let's start first with the example of proxemics. Proxemics refers to the common amount of distance that a person needs to have between themselves and other people as understood across a culture in general. For example, Americans and Australians need more personal space than any other group of people on the planet. So how does that impact the way that you use English? If someone's culture has a different kind of proxemics than yours, then they may sit closer to you or further away from you in a meeting. When I was teaching at the university, I had a Colombian student come up to me and stand very close to my face to just have a conversation. For me, it felt very close as an American, but for her, it felt normal. In a situation like that, being aware of this will be helpful because what you don't want to do is take a step backwards while the person is talking. You don't want to miscommunicate with your behavior and body language that you have a problem with them when you actually don't. In this way, you could miscommunicate and it have nothing to do with your English. Another example of deep culture is reward and privilege. In many cultures, you're rewarded based on who you are, not what you do. In a place like the United States or Canada, you're typically rewarded in society more for what you accomplish and do than for who you are, who your family is, who your tribe is. Let me give you a clear example of how your behavior can reflect privilege in a way that's meaningful for your communication. In North America, it is common in the mainstream culture for you to make eye contact with someone when you are speaking to them as a way of showing respect and that you're following the conversation. This is, of course, true in many different cultures around the world. But it's also true that in many cultures, you don't make eye contact with the other person you're speaking to for some or all of the conversation, depending on the topic or depending on the nature of the conversation. For example, if you have someone managing a team of people and the manager comes from a culture where it is respectful for you to look someone directly in the eye during confrontation, and it is her responsibility to confront her team because she suspects that someone has been stealing money from the cash register. She pulls the team together in a team meeting and she asks all of the employees directly who took money from the cash register and gave them all an opportunity to tell the truth. Of the team members who share the same culture with her, they will be comfortable to make eye contact with her during this confrontation. But for, say, the immigrant employees on the team who may or may not have that same culture, they might not be making eye contact because that would be something you would never do during a confrontation in their home culture. So who will the manager suspect is possibly lying and not telling the truth? It will be the team members who are not making eye contact with her. This is another example of where culture can impact your communication and it have nothing to do with your grammar or vocabulary and how you speak at work. Another example of deep culture. In our societies around the world, we all have different expectations and roles designated for different genders. So this is a topic that is sociological, that is not sex and biological. So when we talk about how you can miscommunicate because of cultural differences in gender, let me give you an example. Let's take the handshake. It's very common in North America for you to meet someone who has a very firm handshake. This is a way of showing respect. It's kind of like the eye contact thing. But if you go to a place like Saudi Arabia or Oman, you might find that men give each other much softer handshakes than you would in a place like Canada or the United States. In Gulf Arab countries, a softer handshake from a man actually represents a very honorable way to greet another person. You don't want in that environment for somebody to have a firm handshake. However, the total opposite would be true in the United States. If somebody greets you with a soft handshake, it would feel disrespectful. The exact same behavior. Next on the list related to deep culture, we have concepts of time. Around the world, time is something that is very relative to the way society uses time as a tool. Consider time in two different general ways of using it. Monochronic culture is where people usually do one thing at one time. Polychronic culture is where people usually do multiple things or can do multiple things all at once. In a more monochronic work culture, when you are on the clock, it means that you are only working and you don't mix in socializing. Your friends don't typically come to visit you at work and hang out with you in your office while you're at work on the clock, especially if you work for a more corporate environment. But in a polychronic culture, you may mix work and socializing and have longer work days, where friends or relatives might visit you at work and you may even host or entertain them at your place of work by giving them tea or snacks or something like that, as is customary in the community where you are living and working. In this cultural mindset, you're still continuing to work. You may still answer the door and greet customers as they walk into your shop. You may still be working on your inventory while your nephew is running around playing behind the front desk. But either way, you're going to mix socializing and work a little bit more. This is polychronic culture. Finally, let's talk about grooming and presence. Another one of these deep culture aspects that is kind of difficult to totally understand just from looking at the surface. The reason for this is because in many cultures, status is represented by different decisions that you make and how you present yourself to your community. For example, in Azerbaijan, I lived in Baku for 7 months, and something became very clear to me that the cleanness of my shoes was an important way of how I present myself in public. This is something that not as many people care about in the United States. So if you come from a community that is more sensitive to how dress and presence are indicators of how you are respectable in a group, then you may be surprised in some much more informal settings and much more informal corporations like ones from North America, where a CEO may come into work with a t-shirt. So I hope you found this video helpful today and maybe a bit eye-opening. If you've never considered how cultural differences can impact your communication in very practical ways. Again, if you're looking for more on this topic, get that free copy of my book, Big World Legends, with the link in the description. Use the code LEGENDS to get 100% off. And of course, like and subscribe so I know that this was helpful for you and to get more videos like this in the future. Thanks again for checking it out, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next video.